while back, I was coaching a student for their recital. Initially, they were quite withdrawn and hesitant to make choices in their songs. Over the course of the semester, we talked about how to analyze a score, looking at the music and lyrics for clues about the character and how to activate given circumstances. By the time the dress rehearsal rolled around, the student was finally beginning to play, more fully embodying each song. I remember them stopping at one more moment and saying, "This is fun." And during their recital, they smashed it out of the park, truly in front of a loving, packed crowd. Now, the student's voice teacher turned to me and said, "They just needed a supportive audience." And it's true. I believe an audience helped. But with great admiration, I would suggest it was more than that. This student had done their work. They knew their songs frontwards and backwards. And more than that, they had figured out how they intersected with their songs through their own lived experience. That work doesn't just materialize, at least not in any sort of sustainable way. It's a skill that needs to be trained, just like breath management or vowel tuning or registration. So how do we help students do that? Hi, my name is David Sisco. My pronouns are he, him, and welcome to my podcast, Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. This podcast is dedicated to the art and practice of teaching singers. It is an extension of my forthcoming book of the same title, which is coming out so soon. It's going to be released in July of this summer by Routledge Press. Today, we're going to talk about artistry. Specifically, we're going to talk about exploring artistry with students. Our special guest is Amer Khosla, who I've had the great pleasure of working with, first as a student at NYU while he was completing his degree at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study, and now as a professional singer-songwriter based in India. More on him in just a minute. But first, let's talk about artistry. Let's first try to define artistry if we can. When I was researching artistry for my book, I quickly realized everyone had a slightly different opinion about what artistry was. For some, it had to do with the artist's commitment to the text. For others, it was related to a performer's magnetism. My wonderful colleague, Australian pedagogue Di Hughes, promoted a research-based definition of contemporary vocal artistry, which includes expressivity, individuality, and stylistic integrity. I love that. And through her work and the research of others, I similarly settled on three spokes of artistry: stylistic integrity, interpretation, and individuality. So if we can coalesce around that definition, at least for the purposes of today, what are the ways that we can help students foster those three spokes of artistry? Well, we can start by co-creating a safe space where students can feel comfortable to make what I like to call an orchestra of sounds. Some of them may be sustainable, some of them not so much. Can we create an environment, however, where it's all good, where the student is encouraged to try things out until they find the best option for what they wish to communicate in a song? And certainly that requires a tremendous willingness to play. Dr. Stuart Brown writes that play helps us deal with difficulties, provides a sense of expansiveness, promotes mastery of our craft, and is an essential part of the creative process. Can we ignite a student's curiosity through play? I also came across the concept of artistic research. Now, the following is a quote from Angelica Buch, defining the practice. It's kind of a long quote, but stay with me here because I think it's really illuminating. She writes that artistic research is a broad field. It encompasses many different concepts. She writes, "I prefer to use the term art-based practice research, as I consider it to be research founded on a particular art practice. First, on the artist's activity in pursuit of a concrete question or a set of not yet clearly defined questions by employing artistic means and methods. And secondly, on the presentation of the process and or outcome in the form of an artwork." The proximity to scientific strategies and practices lies in the not yet knowing, in the desire to show and understand, and in the fact that artists often use ethnographic, sociological, collecting, archiving, and laboratory work practices, that they experiment with processes that produce images or deal with new media and technosciences. Thus, artistic research can be considered as a means of approaching human subjects, including oneself, objects, and contexts, current or historical. An examination often combined with an interest in gaining concrete experiences in an endeavor to convey these in a sensorially perceptible form, to incite reflection, amusement, disturbance, or even provocation. This quote reminds me that what we do as artists is scholarly, creative, and synergistic. And in this age of mimicking other artists, I think we have a responsibility to teach students this as well. In my book, I examine 3 songs: Western classical, musical theater, and pop rock, and share how we might encourage a student to access the 3 spokes of artistry through artistic research. I cannot wait to share this chapter with you because it's a conversation I think I want all of us to be having more. Of course, technique is invaluable, but when we use technique to support our artistry, we have an opportunity to connect to others on a deeper level, on a human and even spiritual level.
रात भीगी मैं तो भीगा बात अधूरी रात सीधा तेरे महफिल का मसीहा हूँ क्या.
I'm happy to introduce you to today's very special guest, Amer Khosla. Amer is a songwriter and producer from Jalandhar, Punjab, India. His musical focus coalesces around existential lyrics and lush electronic soundscapes, a kind of interplay that for him signifies emotional release and safety in an increasingly frenzied, frenetic world. Currently, he is working on a project called Punjab 2047, which paints a retrofuturist vision of his home state through folk and Sufi poetry, bare electronic arrangements, and his usual dance music styles. Unlike his previous projects, Mira Memoirs and Kudar, Punjab 2047 will be released as a collaborative project under the Mira Records banner, a speculative record label floated by Amer himself. Amer, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
I'm so thrilled, and I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. Thank you so much for making the time for it.
Of course. I think it's been a couple of years in the making, I would say.
I would totally agree with you. Totally agree. I was trying to remember when. So we started working. Was it your freshman year we started?
Yeah, it was October. It's like September 2020, I think.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Pandemic times. That's right.
Yeah.
So 5 years we've been working together. That's amazing.
And I think like when we had that that sort of like farewell like charcuterie and like chit chat session, I feel like that was when it was like cemented that we needed to like probably talk at a more extensive length, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad too that this relationship has lasted past your degree, and I've been so grateful to be witness to the work you're doing as a singer-songwriter and the work you're doing in India. It's incredibly inspiring to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So today I just thought we would talk a little bit about artistry, and I wanted to start. You saw that I shared a couple of different people's opinions, I'll say, of what the definition of artistry was. And so I just wanted to ask you, what is your definition of artistry? How would you define
it? So, yeah, I mean, it's ever evolving, and I don't think I have a complete answer. But for me, I think at this present moment, I would say artistry is somewhat of a like dynamic balance between skill and intent. Like it's sort of interplay between the two, where you're trying to like produce emotion or feeling or something in the audience or whoever you may be performing for. So I think like um, the individual artistry or the individual's artistry sort of boils down to like how they combine all these like technical things that they sort of learn from like all these years of coaching or singing or just being an artist, and combining that with perhaps what was their original intent that moved them towards art, or what their intent is every time they sing and go out, and what they sort of are feeling with that material that they choose to perform. So I think it's sort of finding where along that scale I think like you as an individual slide, and I think
Mm.
people obviously lie somewhere on some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that a lot, and it's that it evolves because we evolve, right?
Yeah, and I like that, like I like thinking of the definition in this way because like it centers the sort of audience, right? Because I think like and the audience may be just one person, but like it's sort of the point being that like to perform art, I think one like people would agree, or at least that's my thing, is that like it exists to sort of evoke something in someone else, to move them in a certain capacity, either to sort of make them feel the same thing you're feeling, or perhaps not, but it's some way of declaring that you're sort of alive, and like that you're like it's a declaration that like we can move each other through these means, as strangers, as like as friends, as whatever. So
Yeah, yeah, I love that.
महका सा है ये समा बीते नशे में ये दूरी के पल अब बाकी बचा भी है क्या हवा में उड़ते हैं तेरे खत और राज के सारे जवाब तुझे जंजीर से मतलब मैं तो पंछी बन चला तेरा जो रात था वो कभी मेरा ना था.
What are some ways that you've gone about activating artistry in a song? What are some things that that come to mind when you think about bringing artistry
hmm.
into the songs you sing?
Right. So I guess I can answer this question more broadly at first, and I think it can't be something contrived, right? Like, so when I say like, hey, like you want to evoke a feeling in someone else, I don't necessarily look at it as like, okay, so how do I make people feel things? I think that's maybe like putting the cart before the horse, and I think like it's sort of a situation where you probably need, as the artist, much better attunement with your own feelings, and how can you become that person who is actualized in a way where they are like able to feel and track like all these many sensations that come to you throughout the day. So I think like having that kind of like porosity as a person, like just being open to sensations, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, whatever they are, like I think that sort of is something that is the first integral step in like activating your artistry, and like second step for me, I would say, before I get to like maybe a more specific answer, I would say would be like I think you need clear acceptance and understanding of like what being an artist like does for you and why you do that. um, and I mean to say that in a way where like, and why I say acceptance, which I think is important, is because like I don't think you as an artist should judge your intent, right? Like let's say somebody's intent is like, hey, I do art so that I can sustain myself and I can like get all this like attention and uh like space in this world that I've sort of craved, and this kind of like this like validation or whatever you want to call that. And I think like just being clear and open with that, and just sort of being attuned to those feelings because they are your feelings, already puts you in a space where you're gonna be ready to activate your artistry, right? And then of course once you do that as a person, because like your art can only be a reflection of you as an emotional being, I feel like then you're in a space to like more specifically look at like the work you're doing, whether that's like specific songs or music you're writing or anything. But like I think first you can't be like a zombie, so to speak, or you need to like mitigate that as much as possible.
What I'm taking from what you're saying is the you have to have a why. Like why are you an artist? It's kind of like maybe your mission statement. And again,
I think so, yeah.
maybe that can change, but over time, right? Of course that
Of
can
course.
evolve. But but it's maybe starting with that sense of not only, as you said, awareness of, of life experiences and how that impacts you and others, but then also like, why am I an artist? What do I feel like I want to share with the world?
Hmm.
Yeah, I like that you're starting kind of starting with a kind of big umbrella and then kind of getting more specific.
No, especially because like you brought me on the podcast as sort of like a younger guest. I don't know if I am that, but like
You are.
I'll sort of go with that. But like I feel like something I encounter a lot with people my age is that like there is an artificial sort of frantic feeling that is imposed by like the state of platforms, I would say. So like with like just the online space and sort of where artists are forced to exist or choose to exist in sort of their to cultivate a career, right? And I think like sort of there is just such a breakneck speed at which things move that like we don't get a chance to sort of really like consolidate what we already have and who we already are before we're like just flitting from one thing to the next, trying to sort of catch on to like where this like invisible zeitgeist keeps moving, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that is the reason why like that's something I've sort of seen and learned from like you and from other teachers that I've come across who are sort of somewhere along further along their journey, and of course they grew up in a slightly different space, like for art, like in terms of where like art and art a career in art what it looks like. But it's just that ability to pause and like take stock of yourself for yourself, because I think it sort of will make you feel more confident in who you are, but B, I think like it will, whatever you do will be less diluted, whether that's like singing one phrase or like a whole project. I think it will just be more purely your essence. And I think like that's also part of this like artistry activation is like you kind of owe it to the world if you're declaring yourself as an artist to like bring your essence to them, because only you have that, right? Like nobody else has that.
It should be enough.
So we've kind of talked about that in a beautiful general way. How about specific, like how do you apply artistry to a song? Once you've kind of learned the song, gotten it into your body technically,
Hmm.
what are the things that you're thinking about when you kind of are thinking about how you put your stamp on a song?
Right. So the thing with technique that is sort of that I've come to realize is like the first thing it's sort of allowed me to do is like actually just practice for longer. And that's like a practical thing, but like I think just for like at first practicing better cues, like when we started along like practicing you know like a relaxed jaw or like practicing with like better breath control, these things just allowed me to feel more comfortable and allowed like less voice hoarseness, so like when I started. But along my journey, I think like as technique has become more of something that maybe sits in the background a bit as sort of like muscle memory, I think it has allowed me to sort of just practice for longer or like feel less fatigued vocally. So that's like a real thing that sort of I feel has been very beneficial to me, right? And even on the mental side, like if we're talking about, we've looked at many songs where we've said that, oh, like this is something that we're going to transition to like your head voice, or we're going to sort of move to a section which demands like sort of higher notes, but you don't actually have to sort of worry about it. You just sort of focus on like those fundamentals, breath and relaxed posture, and like how like that will kind of take you there. And so using, in a way, like when you sort of look at technique like that, it sort of becomes the tool, like it becomes your pencil, and it's like having a sharpened pencil versus having a more blunt pencil to sort of, you still got to make the sketch right? Like the technique's not going to make the pencil's not going to make the sketch for you, but I think like what sort of happens is that like you can really sort of decide where you want to like take that sketch and sort of like and you can even decide to like dull the pencil, like let the pencil be sharpened for a while and then blunt it out and do all that stuff. But like it's sort of just knowing that like that's the sharpest it can be and you can take it to there. And and it just allows for that kind of flexibility, because a lot, again, like speaking of like people my age, and I've sort of heard the common misconception among some of us that like, like music theory and so on, like just getting more advanced on the technical side sort of like drew them away from like their original emotional sort of reason or the emotional intent vis-a-vis making art. But to me that sounds like bad practice, right? Like, because
Mm.
you can continue to tap in with yourself. It's you who's getting more enamored by the technicality because maybe that makes you feel a certain way about like where you're at now as an artist. But I think like you can always choose to bring those two things up simultaneously, like uh and maybe it's not like simultaneously in the sense that, hey, they're moving together all the time. Some points, for a few weeks or a few months, you may feel like, hey, I've made all these technical adjustments, but like on the artistic side, I feel like I may have lost a bit of touch with my artistry, or like really bringing things out the way I want them to. But at other points in time, like you'll be like, oh, I didn't notice how much more I feel I can bring myself into the music so easily. So it may be like not simultaneous, but it sort of happens continuously. I think as long as you keep doing the work, and that is the technical work, but also, as I said, the emotional work. Like you just gotta be that open, porous person, and I think like that's it's something I know that like you talk about in your book, which I'm looking forward to reading. But like plug, but like, but, but like, but like if it's really wholehearted voice pedagogy, then like that's what it means, right? It means to sort of like that life, like your life doesn't stop when you come into the voice lesson or the performance, right? Like it's like all flowing in. So like it's a reflection of that. And wait, I was gonna make another point here which I kind of like, but it slipped my mind now. So
You're making so many. First of all, I just want to highlight the pencil metaphor, which I'm categorically going to steal. Or and
no,
I'll
no.
give you credit because I think that that's such a great metaphor for why we have technique in the first place. It just gives you options, right? So yeah, you can draw a really bold line, or you can shade something in, or
Hmm.
that's a really great way of saying like this is, you know, your technical work should support the choices you want to make as an artist.
Hmm.
And the other thing that I heard you bring up is like, yeah, there are times where, and you're already kind of going on to the next question a little bit, which is perfect. But the idea of like, how does technique support artistry, and when does it get in the way? Because I've had this conversation, and I share this in the book with one of my contemporary students, Josh, where he says, sometimes in a voice lesson, I don't bring my artistry in as much, my
Hmm.
final performance artistry in as much, because I don't want to make choices that 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 you're not going to be pleased with as the teacher, and you're going to think that I'm not doing my technical work. And
Hmm.
which was like, oh God. When he said that, like I felt like I was like, okay. So I was like, you can make any sound in the studio, and if we'll work on it if it's not with the sound that you want, and if it feels like not sustainable. I
Hmm.
never want students to try to appease me and appease because that's not interesting. Like I wanna, I want to give students permission to access their artistry. Now, not give them permission. They have permission. I want them to
Hmm.
claim their agency to be the artists that they want to be. And then if something's
Hmm.
not sustainable, then we can touch on it, right?
Hmm.
But it's this idea that like I think this happens a lot in voice lessons, is that even when I do try to create a safe environment for my students, but I think there is that dynamic between teacher and student. It's like there's a power dynamic, and so it's
Hmm.
it's continuing to remind students like, you don't have to appease me. You don't. This is I'm not asking you to sound a certain way for me. I want you to figure out what works for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and how your technique supports the choices you want to make. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Because I think
and
that's
I can
really
sort of and I can sort of like continue your metaphor, so if technique is the pen is again, like if technique is sort of that sharpening of the pencil, I think like you are in a way are also sort of playing that role of being the facilitator for the person to do the painting, like, or do the sketch. It's the same role. And I'm not going to throw any shade at like other teachers that I've sort of uh, encountered and so on. So I'm going to be like a bit strategic with this next point. But like what I'm sort of saying is that I have been in situations where I feel like the teacher has sort of, and I have brought in sort of like whether it's a group class, sometimes it's been a group class, sometimes it's been individual. We sort of bring in uh, roles, or we like sort of start conforming to certain roles, right? Like I think it's much easier in a group setting.
sure.
Uh, so if it's a small group class, I think that's more likely to happen. But sometimes it's not, and sort of what happens is that sort of neutral space is gone, right? And like for me, I very easily can become a bit ashamed of performance. So like that can look like being afraid of making mistakes. That can look like being afraid to sort of experiment into the class, and like just sort of being consigned to the role of a certain kind of student. Do you know what I mean? Who I may
Yeah.
or may not be, but like we're playing these sort of archetypes in the classroom, right? And I think like uh, that is quite damaging to like this whole artistry technique balance, because like what ends up happening is, right, like in sort of trying to appease the teacher, or like just trying to be that, stay afloat, be that good student, you sort of like the thing you forgo most easily, I think, is sort of your sort of what you are also bringing to that dynamic. Because if it's a group class, individual class, you are whatever big percentage of that. Like without you, something is gone when that class is not there.
Yeah.
So I mean, not to sort of toot your horn or anything, but like I appreciate that like the one thing that you have focused on is creating a neutral space. I wouldn't even say like it's a space of excessive praise, or just like making me feel disarmed or anything. It's just a space where there is a certain sense of neutrality, which means I'm not really sort of reading into things, afraid of things, so on and so forth. It's a space where nobody's really bringing anything. It doesn't seem like something from the past or something of that sort is sort of entering into this space. It feels like something new. And like, I mean, it's funny because like people will often say this about therapists, and I've said this about therapists, like where like I've been in that setting and I feel like I have to perform for the therapist because I'm afraid of their judgment.
Yeah.
And I think like vocals and like singing for me personally from childhood has always been something that, even though I've like always gravitated towards it, it has somehow been rooted in shame, and the shame of performance. And so I think like it's a very delicate thing. And I think like uh to really hone in and bring out that artistry, you need to be able to exist in that neutral space.
I like this idea of the sliding scale, where like sometimes technically it feels like you're really everything's kind of in the zone, and then artistically you may feel a little lost in terms of what you want to say. Or
Hmm.
I'm wondering if you can speak to a time where maybe the other way around is true, where like artistically you felt like you really knew what you wanted to say,
Hmm.
but technically you didn't. It was you were having a hard time technically to kind of get where you wanted to be artistically. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think I encountered that recently. Like we worked on a song maybe a month or so, 2 months ago, something like that. It was this Stevie Wonder track that we worked on, right? And
Ah,
there were certain passages where we were trying to like nail down like this sort of transition to head voice, and like really trying to like uh, like get the technique to support to be more sustainable and to feel more energetic and energized. And I felt like with that track, I had like an attachment to it for like a while, and I sort of like knew the song, and I sort of knew what it made me feel. But technically, I felt like I was just not like getting there, and that was causing me some frustration. And I think eventually, sort of what helped me out with that was sort of not overthinking the technique, because I think what had happened was, in trying to like practice and nail down that particular section, I had sort of like I was like practicing only that part, and I had
Mm.
sort of like removed it from the bigger picture of the song. And like I won't lie, I still struggle with that part, but I think like um, I sort of brought myself home by like uh, practicing that difficult section in the context of the whole song, and I knew I had the emotional part dialed in. So I just tried to like be less paranoid about the technique and be more sort of like accepting of myself making that mistake, if you want to call it that, or just sort of like not being able to do what we had set out to do. And honestly, when we did a final few run throughs in class, like when I was taking it easy and sort of like not being like, like, oh, this section's coming up and I know it's going to be difficult for me to sing, and not getting sort of locked into that, it was flowing much more easily. So I think oftentimes, like when you are connected to material or you've known the song and then you tackle it in class or in a performance, I think like the artistry side is something that you can maybe activate more easily. So this may be more sort of in the pop rock, in the pop rock sphere. This may be more likely, right? Like because those are songs
Mhm.
that people have sort of lived with and grown up with. But with the technique, like I think it sort of becomes a question of maybe sometimes you're not going to nail it and you're going to continue to struggle with it. But it's sort of, for me at least, it became with this song, it became more about like the mindset with which I approach it, that I think I already have the song where I want it to be, and it's going to kind of sit there and it's going to be with me for whenever I want to include it in my repertoire. And the technical adjustments just exist to keep me on my toes. I'm not going to get it right all the time, but the intent to do that is there. And I think like I think I'm fine with that. like uh like I don't think I'm going to be perfect with a lot of material, but that's sort of, to me that's like, there's been a couple of classes we've had where like, I'm just not getting things right, or like I'm just struggling with something or the other. And to me those end up being some of the most fruitful classes, because that's where sort of like my ego as the performer drops, and I'm like, hey, like I remember that I'm in this to be loose and flexible and to have fun, and to
Mm.
sort of and to sort of keep me on my toes in a way. And so I remain grateful for that stuff as well, although part of me
That's
obviously is very annoyed sometimes, but
right.
yeah.
It's such a human response, right? I mean,
uh,
but I mean, I appreciate your ability to be flexible in that way. I think that's a real challenge for any artist. And the other thing that comes up for me is as a teacher is like I'm always thinking, you know, when we're trying to balance technique and artistry, I'm always thinking like, okay, when we're working on a particular section that's maybe causing someone trouble, like, all right, do I come in the technical doorway or do I come in like the intentional doorway? Like,
hmm
do I use imagery to evoke something so they're not getting into their heads about
hmm
like, or do I need to come in the technical doorway? It's just like to me that balancing act as a teacher is always a really great challenge because I have to kind of read the room. I have to read the student and kind of see where they are. Are they getting in their head? Are they would they how can I inspire their curiosity, whether it is
hmm
technique or artistry? How can I inspire that curiosity that allows their voice to open up, right? That balance is really interesting to me, and trying to help the singer overcome that disconnect between technique and artistry.
Yeah, I think I like that you sort of insist on curiosity, because I think to me curiosity sort of contrasts like perfectionism and sort
Yes.
of absolute answers. And like as musicians, we're very guilty of perfectionism. And I think like the idea that like, oh, you're not getting this passage, that does not mean you're suddenly like oh, you can't sing anymore. Like, and that sort of sense of doom may even hit you, and it hits me sometimes, like, oh, I'm not getting this right, I can't sing. Like, so, but
Right.
like, if you're sort of able to shift from the mindset of like perfectionism and absolutism, which is, not to get all broad here, but that is a fascist instinct,
Mm.
right? That is something that like, that is actively against curiosity and play and all these things that are revolutionary ideas. So like, I think like the more we are like easy on ourselves, and like that is why I think like technique and artistry as two different pillars, and you on this sliding scale along it, is much easier to sort of exist in and feel comfortable in, rather than this idea that like, oh, you need to hit these certain points and this certain thing, and every mistake is sort of a reflection of your personhood or something of that kind.
Oh, that's exhausting, right? It's just like it's not sustainable.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure we have talked about this previously, but like this is something I've struggled with, and I continue to struggle with, right? Like, which is that like, uh I think like that my actions, whether that they are career related or music related or otherwise, are not, they don't tie into how I should treat myself. And that definitely comes into this space, when you're struggling with the music, or on my songwriting end, when I'm struggling with some songwriting, or that doesn't necessarily mean I have to like devalue myself. And I think like, and that's what like in the realm of technique, why that's so relevant is because like the way you have broached technique with me is sort of like that technique is ultimately tied to longevity, right, and to
Yes.
safety, and it's not tied to like some sort of code of like some sort of code of performer, that like, this is the proper way to do things and this is the illegitimate way to do things. And oftentimes like that's how things are taught and have been taught to me. But I think by sort of moving away from that and seeing technique and sort of these kinds of fundamental as way of taking care of yourself as the performer, I think like it's much more powerful.
In the last 6 months or so, we've started working on some of your great songs,
True,
which
true,
I
true.
have just enjoyed so much.
Thank
Um,
you.
and I was interested because I think we've had some really good conversations about similarities and differences between, um, you know, investigating artistry in a song written by someone else versus you've written the song, so of course you know what it's about, but as then when you're performing it, you still have to kind of investigate that, right? And so I'm
Mm-hmm,
just
mm-hmm.
wondering if it seemed like maybe you've had some light bulbs go off around that idea, and I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what is it to investigate artistry in something somebody else has written versus something that you yourself has have written.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I honestly think that it's not too different.
Hmm.
Like I think that there is one thing that ties them together, and that is like in approaching my own material as a performer, right? Because I've already written it out, I've already even released it, or as approaching like something that's like, let's say we're doing a cover or something. I feel like as the performer, I still want to focus on like centering the work and sort of me being an execution, like me directing the execution. So like I still try to see myself as a performer even when I'm performing my own material. Like I sort of
Sure.
like try to move away from the fact that, oh, I wrote this song and so on. I want to still let the work shine as much as possible, because I believe that like all the all the sort of beauty is already there, and I'm sort of like announcing it to the world. And I think like that's the one thing that stays the same, you know. So that's why like I don't think I would try to sort of like completely create a new version of the song live or something like that, unless of course the situation called for it. I'm not saying that it couldn't happen, but in general I think like I would try to approach it with that same mindset that like we've talked about, which is, you know, center the work and let it talk for you. And so, but out of that, something interesting has come, right? Which is that like, which is this thing of like reverse engineering the whole like the sort of performer side of things, which we've sort of encountered with some of the tracks I've written, because these tracks were sort of written, recorded, and everything in a studio environment, which obviously enabled me to sort of like, you know, do some things vocally, have some like kind of spaces and sentences and some sort of verses that maybe I really couldn't have written if I was sort of writing the song to be performed first instead of recorded first, which is obviously like has been the traditional way, right? So in sort of like reverse engineering these tracks together, I think like we added a few new layers of meaning and depth to these songs, whether that be like on the performance side, where we saw how like differently we could perform them, where we could add energy, where we could add breaths, like all this stuff that sort of really added a whole new layer to the song. Like it enriched the whole like world that music lives in. But also I think like artistically, and sort of on the sort of thematic side of things, I think like working with the track this way and seeing it together with you, and sort of like, which sort of detaches me from it in a very nice way, because what happens with me and with any other musician, I'm sure you've been through this, you get too close to the work, right? Like it's sort of
Sure.
like, and then you sort of become paranoid about it, and sort of like it's like a weird psychological relationship develops with the thing. But like in sort of witnessing it with you, I'm able to sort of detach from it and see it as a performer, and sort of that I think reveals a new set of textures, but also like a new kind of appreciation for the work. So I think like uh, I'm not even sure if I had like, maybe there's this part of me that says, hey, I wish I had done this before releasing it. But I kind of like the aspect of like just making it and putting it out, and then like that doesn't mean that it's the end of that thing, you know, like
Well said. Yeah, it's not, it doesn't make the previous version less valid. It's
yeah.
just, you're just continuing to evolve and explore your work. Yeah. I love this idea of, because, you know, when I sing my work to it, like I feel like I'm like, okay, I have to turn the creative side off a little bit, right?
Uh-huh.
And now
Yeah.
I'm the performer, right? Now I'm the performer, so I'm going to focus on doing my work as the performer. So right, like, and so we can kind of bifurcate our brains a little bit and be like, I'm going to explore it through the lens of being a performer and how I would engage with the text, and with the music in that way, right? And so, you know,
And
I
in a
love.
way that's like sorry to cut you off, but that's like showing yourself that respect that you sort of like, that you deserve, right? Like because like if you were to sort of just like say, oh no, this needs to change, and this needs to change, this needs to go, like that's sort of like devaluing your work. Whereas like uh you wouldn't do that to like like we wouldn't do that to some like Stevie Wonder song. Like we wouldn't just say, oh no, you know what, this sort of line here doesn't really work, and we're gonna change it now. So like I think like it's a really important bifurcation, because in doing that it's like self-affirming also.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, although I've known many people who have done that. Be like, I know better than Stevie Wonder. I'm going to do this. Like, no, you
uh,
don't.
I mean, maybe they do, but like know your role, like
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
like you
I mean,
know.
you know, I say that jokingly, but also realizing that one of the things that's really great, especially with, you know, pop rock styles, is that there is a flexibility to change
Mhm.
arrangement. To do, of course, that exists. I think what we're talking about is more like rewriting. You know, like
But not
major.
even real. Like
Yeah,
I agree with you on that, but like you and I have discussed this, where like, oh, you just add like 10 like riffs and even like runs and so on. So like I'm not saying that like you can't be flexible, but I think like again, you just have to be clear with your intent. I think like you've said to me so many times, like is your intent in making that change to like further amplify what's already there, or are you inserting yourself somewhere where maybe like you shouldn't
Ding, ding,
necessarily
ding.
do that?
Yeah, that's and it's a question we all have to ask. It's like, yeah, who are we serving?
Yeah. And of course we're guilty, I'm guilty of that all the time, but it's just like catching yourself as much as possible, really.
रात भीगी मैं तो भीगा बात अधूरी रात सीधा तेरे महफिल का मसीहा हूँ क्या
For the listeners, I've been using some of your music as like little segues, and so just
uh,
because I want people to celebrate and to kind of get to know your fantastic work, and so to that end, can you talk a little bit about what you have coming up and how people can keep track of your great work?
mhm. Yeah, so currently on the music front, taking a bit of a not a left turn or anything, but like working on different stuff from what I've done previously. So currently, like the past two albums I've put out have been like electronic dance music in like Hindi, in Hindi primarily. But currently, what I'm working on is a project that's in Punjabi, which is my mother tongue, and it's sort of a project that it's retro futuristic, I guess. It's sort of like looking at like a lot of old poetry, so Sufi poetry and like just Punjabi, poetry and like sort of that kind of material. And it's sort of us trying to compose whether that's new melodies or these new soundscapes, but we're like trying to really work with these like really bare electronic like uh, spaces and like really just try to keep a sort of whole minimalistic futuristic thing to it. So it's not really dancey per se. There are going to be some dance songs, and I'm trying to work with some like percussionists and so on, but generally the focus is very much in trying to sort of offer up answers to like modern questions that like sort of are in the Punjabi psyche and that like people are grappling with and struggling with, but like trying to find the answers and sort of show that the answers are already there in the past, but we're like looking in the wrong places.
Hmm, I love that. And then in terms of, tell us about your about Instagram and like all the
Oh
handles.
yeah, the actual plug. Yeah, so I'm my Instagram handle is indeed Amer. So that's INDEEDAMER. Um, and on Spotify and Apple Music and so on, you can find me at am.e.r, uh, which is where I put all my existing music. But actually, this new project is not going to be under my banner. It's going to be like under a collective title, which I think is called Mera Records. So like, I kind of didn't want to have it be like my project. So I think that's going to be.
I love that.
But yeah, if of course if you get connected with me on these socials, you'll sort of see that happen. So yeah.
Sure. Good. Well, I'm so grateful for so many things, but for your time today, for this conversation, and just for our continued ability to kind of to create that neutral space and play and find different things in the music, different ways of your expressing yourself through your vocalism. It is life-giving to be part of that process. Thank you so much.
No, just thank you for the guidance and yeah, just all the influence and just making me feel safe and supported and sort of confident to sing, uh, in a way which I haven't experienced before. Like, so I'm very grateful for that.
I hope you got as much out of that conversation as I did. I just think so much of Amer. He's just such a smart artist, and it's great to see young artists thinking the way that he does. I'm wondering, what are your definitions of artistry? And how do you help students foster their own artistry in a song through the lens of their lived experience? And what are some stumbling blocks you may perceive on the way to a student accessing their own artistry? Sound off. You can email me at wholeheartedvoicepedagogy@gmail.com, or you can find me on the socials. My handle on most platforms is at Sisco Songs or at Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. And look, you have made it this far, so if you haven't already, why not subscribe to this podcast? We are getting so close to the release of my book, and I have some really cool stuff to share with you. I don't want you to miss a thing. More soon. Take care of you.